Dominic Ferris didn't expect his Friday night to end with cold sesame noodles, a thunderstorm, and a woman with rain in her hair who would flip his entire world upside down. He'd been pacing the floor of his penthouse suite in downtown Manhattan, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the lightning-skyline like a dramatic set piece. A glass of untouched scotch sat sweating on the marble counter. The board meeting had run late, the chef had gone home, and Dominic hadn't eaten since breakfast. He didn't usually do takeout, but tonight he broke his rule. He called the nearest 24-hour Chinese joint. 10 minutes later, the storm hit. 25 minutes later, the doorbell rang. He opened it to find her standing there, soaked from head to toe. The red delivery jacket clung to her arms, her dark jeans were plastered to her legs, and her black boots were dripping onto his pristine marble floor. Her chin lifted, eyes locking on his like she wasn't the one standing on the doorstep of a billionaire's penthouse, shivering with 2 plastic bags of food in her hands. "You Dominic?" she asked, brushing wet strands of hair from her face. He stared at her for a second too long before answering. "Yeah." She held out the bags. Lo mein, sesame noodles, dumplings, and a side of crab rangoon. He took the food, but his eyes stayed on her. "You walked here in that?" "Bike," she said. "But yeah." The rain didn't care. He stepped aside. "Come in." She blinked. "What?" "You're soaked. You can't keep delivering in that. Come in, dry off." She hesitated. "I'm not allowed to." "I won't tell if you don't." Her lips twitched almost a smile, and then she stepped inside. He shut the door behind her. The storm roared louder against the windows. "I'm Dominic," he said. "I guessed," she said, tugging off her wet jacket. "I'm Elise." He liked the way her name sounded. Strong, but soft at the edges. She was beautiful, but not in the overdone way women usually were around him. She didn't care who he was. Not yet. He grabbed a towel from the guest bathroom and tossed it to her. "You want tea or something hot?" "No, I should go. You'll get sick if you go back out in that." She glanced toward the window, where rain painted streaks against the glass. "I've had worse nights." Still, he moved to the kitchen and started unpacking the food. "You eat." She hesitated again. "I'll pay you triple for the meal if you stay and eat 15 minutes, he added casually, but his heart beat a little faster than it should have. She narrowed her eyes. "You bribing me with egg rolls?" "I'm bribing you with a warm room and food." "But sure, egg rolls too." Elise set her bag on the counter and pulled out a stool. 15 minutes. Then I'm back to the rain. They sat across from each other, the silence filled with the soft sound of chopsticks scraping against takeout containers. Dominic watched her from the corner of his eye. She ate like someone who hadn't had a proper hot meal in days. When she caught him looking, she raised an eyebrow. "What?" "Nothing," he said. "Just, you don't seem like the usual delivery girl." "That's because I'm not. I'm filling in. My brother's sick. I wasn't supposed to take this one, but the guy on shift bailed and the manager begged me." He nodded slowly. "So, you're not usually a delivery girl?" "No," she paused. "I'm a painter." He leaned back. "Really?" "Yeah. Canvases, murals, whatever pays the rent." "You any good?" She gave him a look. "I'll pretend you didn't just ask that." He laughed, actually laughed. It wasn't something he did often. Not sincerely. But there was something about her. Honest. Sharp. Real. She glanced around the penthouse. "So, what do you do?" He wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. "Investments. Tech. A few companies." "Ah," she said, nodding. "So, the kind of rich where you forget to eat." He raised an eyebrow. "You think I'm the forget-to-eat kind of rich? You're wearing a watch that costs more than my rent. And you just offered me 3 times the price of my delivery to stay and eat. So yeah." He smiled. "Fair point." Elise checked the time on her phone. "Okay, I've been here 23 minutes. That's 8 more than I promised." He didn't want her to go, which was insane. He didn't even know her. But there was something about her presence that made the penthouse feel less empty. "Let me drive you home. I biked here." I'll load your bike in the back of my car. She shook her head. I'm good. Elise. Her name came out softer than he meant it to. She looked at him again, eyes curious this time. I'm not trying to impress you, he said. I just don't want you getting sick. She studied him for a long moment. You always this concerned about strangers? No. Just you. That made her laugh. You don't even know me. Then maybe I want to. She stood slowly, pulling on her damp jacket. Thanks for the food. And the towel. Elise. But she was already at the door. She looked back once, just before she opened it. You're not the first rich guy to offer me a ride, Dominic. But you're the first one who made me want to say yes. And then she was gone. He stood there for a long time after, listening to the echo of her boots fade down the hallway. The storm kept raging, but all he could think about was the girl who walked into his penthouse smelling like rain and soy sauce, and somehow left with a piece of his attention he hadn't meant to give. And for the first time in months, Dominic Ferris didn't want to go back to his board meetings or his scotch or the silence of his empty penthouse. He wanted to see her again. The next morning, Dominic canceled his entire schedule. He was supposed to be in Midtown by 8, seated across a boardroom table with 3 of his top executives to finalize a merger worth almost $900 million. Instead, he stood in front of his kitchen window, coffee growing cold in his hand, replaying every word Elise had said before she walked out into the storm. She'd been gone less than 12 hours, and yet, the penthouse felt different now, too quiet, too pristine, too untouched, like her presence had shifted something, and now he couldn't shift it back. He picked up the crumpled receipt from the countertop. The restaurant's name was printed across the top in fading ink. He grabbed his keys. The place was tucked between a pawn shop and a laundromat on the Lower East Side. A narrow storefront with flickering neon and a cracked window decal, the kind of place he wouldn't have looked at twice before last night. A teenage girl behind the counter looked up from her phone when he stepped inside. I'm looking for Elise, he said. She blinked. She's not working today. Do you know when she will be? The girl shrugged. She was just filling in. Her brother usually does the deliveries. He came back this morning. Dominic nodded slowly. Do you know where I might find her? I'd like to commission a painting. The girl tilted her head. You some kind of art collector? He gave her a look. She reached behind the counter and pulled out a pink sticky note. She leaves flyers sometimes. Here. He took it. A name, a number, and a single sentence. Original large-scale art. No portraits. Inquire for pricing. She good? He asked. The girl shrugged. I guess. She painted that. She pointed to a mural on the opposite wall. A wave of midnight blue and gold, sweeping across the cracked plaster like a storm frozen in motion. Dominic stared at it for a long moment before pulling out his wallet and handing the girl a $100 bill. This is for the tip jar. She stared at the bill like it might vanish. Thanks. He walked out without another word. He didn't call the number on the flyer. He hated phone conversations, and besides, he had a better idea. That evening, he had his driver take him 3 blocks past the restaurant. Elise's name wasn't hard to find attached to a small studio listed on a local art collective's website. The address led him to a converted warehouse with ivy crawling over rusted brick and mismatched windows that gave it the look of a place time had forgotten. He climbed the narrow staircase and found her door half open, a thin stream of jazz floating out. He knocked. Elise appeared in paint-splattered overalls, her hair piled on top of her head in a way that looked like it had been forgotten there hours ago. Are you stalking me? She asked, one eyebrow raised, a brush still in her hand. I brought dinner, he replied, holding up a brown paper bag. She stepped aside without commenting. The studio was chaos, canvases stacked against the walls, open jars of pigment across the floor, and an unfinished piece stretching across the entire left wall. Deep reds and black shadows painted in bold, angry strokes. You're not the takeout type, she said as he set the bag on her only clear table. And you didn't get this from the Chinese place. Thai, he said. You strike me as someone who likes spice. She gave a low laugh. Not bad, Ferris. But I still don't get why you're here. He sat on the edge of her paint-splattered couch. I wanted to offer you a job. Her brush froze midair. Doing what? Painting. Obviously. What kind of painting? A mural. In my building. Which building? The one I own in Tribeca. The lobby's been under renovation. I want something original. Not another soulless sculpture or curated installation. She crossed her arms. You want something that looks like that? She gestured to the unfinished mural behind her. I want something that looks like you painted it. She studied him for a long moment, eyes unreadable. I don't work with billionaires. I'm not asking you to. You literally just did. Dominic leaned forward. What if I paid double your usual rate? No restrictions. Full creative control. Why? Because I can. That's not an answer. He stood and walked to the mural she'd been working on. Up close, it was even more intense. There was something in the way the brushstrokes collided: anger, grief, survival. He turned back to her. Because I think you're the best artist I've seen in years. And because I wanted an excuse to see you again. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Elise set her brush down. You know what the problem is with guys like you? She asked quietly. Tell me. You don't know how to want things you can't buy. He didn't flinch. Maybe I'm trying to learn. She walked past him and opened the dinner bag. What kind of curry? Green. I hate green curry. He blinked. Seriously. She pulled out the container, popped it open, and took a bite. No. But I had to knock you down a peg. He couldn't help it. He laughed. Actually laughed. Again. They ate on the floor, her back against the wall. His long legs stretched out across a paint-streaked rug. She told him about the mural she was working on, a commission for a nonprofit shelter downtown. He told her about the building in Tribeca, how it used to be an old textile factory before he bought the entire block. I could make something that feels industrial, she said, but with warmth. Something that reflects the history but still feels alive. His eyes stayed on her as she spoke. I trust your vision. She looked over at him, surprised. He finished the last of his curry. So, you'll do it? Elise stood and crossed the room to a canvas leaning against the far wall. I'll do it on one condition. Name it. I don't want your assistant sending me notes every week. If you want something changed, you come and tell me yourself. Deal. And no corporate meetings. No buzzwords. No terms like synergy or brand identity. Done. She turned to face him. I mean it, Dominic. If you try to turn my work into some glossy press stunt, I'll walk. I won't. She considered him, then nodded once. Then we have a deal. He stood and walked toward the door. I'll have my assistant email over the contract. No assistance, she called after him. He paused, turned back. Right? She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. You really think a mural's gonna be enough of an excuse? He met her gaze. No. But it's a start. She didn't say anything as he descended the stairs. Outside, the air was warm and heavy with the scent of rain-soaked pavement. Dominic slid into the back of his car, pulled out his phone, and typed a message to his legal team. He didn't want a standard artist agreement. He wanted something tailored, flexible, generous. This wasn't just about art anymore. He wasn't sure what it was yet. But whatever it was, it had nothing to do with curry or contracts. It had everything to do with the way Elise looked at the world and the fact that, for the first time in his life, Dominic Ferris wanted to see it the way she did. 3 weeks passed, and not once did Elise ask Dominic why he kept showing up. Not when he arrived unannounced at the studio with fresh canvases and a box of pastries from a bakery she'd once mentioned in passing. Not when he spent an entire Sunday afternoon perched on a stool by the window while she painted, saying nothing, just watching her work like it was the only thing worth doing. And not when he started coming to the mural site in Tribeca every other day under the guise of checking the progress, though everyone knew he'd already signed off on the creative direction. He didn't offer notes. He didn't ask for changes. He just stood there, jacket slung over his shoulder, hands in his pockets, watching her bring the wall to life with broad, confident strokes. Elise didn't question it, but she noticed everything. The way he always kept his phone on silent the moment he stepped into her space. The way he remembered how she took her coffee black, 2 sugars, no judgment. The way he once drove across the city at 7 in the morning just to replace a broken ladder she hadn't even told him about. She never said thank you out loud, but he always seemed to know anyway. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops and bathed the mural in amber light, Dominic leaned against the scaffolding and said, "You ever think about selling your work outside the city?" Elise dipped her brush into a streak of cobalt. "I don't have the connections." "You could. I don't want to owe anyone for them." He folded his arms. "What if you didn't owe anyone? What if someone just wanted to open the right doors?" "You mean you." "I mean someone who believes in what you're doing." She stepped back from the wall, wiped her hands on a rag, and turned to face him. "People don't open doors without expecting something in return." Dominic's expression didn't shift. "Maybe I'm not people." She didn't reply. Instead, she walked to the far side of the mural and picked up a second brush. "You ever pick one of these up?" she asked. He raised an eyebrow. "Not unless it was to sign a contract." "Well, try." He hesitated, but she handed him the brush anyway. "That corner's still blank. Fill it." "Elise, you said you trust my vision. I trust yours for 10 square inches." He stepped forward reluctantly, dipped the brush into the paint she offered, and stared at the wall like it might bite him. For a long second, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he made a single, deliberate line. It was crooked, uneven, unremarkable. She grinned. "Wow, that's awful. I told you. But it's earnest." She tilted her head. "I like it." He looked at her. "You're humoring me. Maybe. But you're a billionaire wielding a paintbrush like it's a contract, and that's worth something." He set the brush down. "You know, you're the first person who's ever said that to me." "What?" "That I'm worth something without the rest." She didn't know what to say to that, so she didn't say anything at all. Later that night, he drove her home. She'd left her bike at the studio, and when he offered her a ride, she didn't argue. The car was quiet, the city lights casting long shadows across the leather seats as they passed under bridges and over narrow intersections. He didn't ask to come in when they reached her building. He just parked at the curb and turned to her as the engine idled softly. "You see things most people miss," he said. "I envy that." Elise rested her hand on the door handle but didn't move. "You hide things most people want to show off. I don't envy that, but I respect it." He gave a slow nod. "You think we're opposites?" "I think we're both trying not to fall off whatever edge we're walking." He leaned forward just slightly. "And what happens if we do?" She looked at him then, really looked. "Then we find out if it was worth the fall." She climbed out before he could say another word. The next morning, he was waiting outside the studio when she arrived. "Elise," he said, cutting straight to it, "come with me this weekend." She blinked. "Where?" "Upstate. I've got a place in the Hudson Valley. Big windows. Quiet. There's a gallery opening nearby I think you should see." She hesitated. "Why me?" "Because I want to show you something that's not concrete and scaffolding. I have work. You can paint there. I'll have your supplies sent in advance." "You planned this?" "No, but I hoped." She didn't answer for a beat. Then, "I'd need to bring my sketchbooks." "Already packed them." She narrowed her eyes. "You're dangerously close to charming." "Just close. Don't push your luck." That Friday, she stepped into his private car wearing a faded denim jacket and carrying a canvas tote covered in ink stains. No makeup, no pretense. Just Elise. And Dominic had never seen someone look more out of place in his world and more right. He didn't take her to a resort. He drove them himself to a modernist glass house nestled in the hills with a view that spilled into a valley of copper-colored trees. Every room was open, airy, curated with the kind of clean elegance that didn't scream wealth, it whispered it. When they arrived, Elise walked straight to the back deck, dropped her bag, and took in the view like she was inhaling something rare. "You live here?" she asked. "Sometimes. You know this isn't normal, right?" "I know. And you brought me here because I wanted to see what you'd make of it." She turned toward him. "You keep saying things like that, like I'm supposed to be some kind of catalyst." "You are." She shook her head. "I'm not magic, Dominic. I'm just trying to pay my rent and not lose my mind." He stepped closer. "You're more than that. You walk into a room and everything starts burning a little brighter. That's not nothing." She looked away. "You don't know me. Then let me." That night, after the gallery opening, a small space filled with raw, visceral art that made Elise go quiet for nearly 10 minutes, he took her to dinner in a candlelit restaurant overlooking the river. There were no menus, just the chef's choice. Each course arrived like a work of art. She ate slowly, contemplatively, and once leaned over to whisper, "This is the first time in 2 years I've eaten something I didn't have to worry about affording." He didn't respond with pity or with promises. He just reached across the table and took her hand. Her fingers didn't tremble, but they didn't pull away either. Back at the house, she didn't ask where she'd be sleeping. He showed her the guest room with the skylight, and she stood in the middle of it, arms crossed, looking up at the stars. "Most people try to impress me with things," she said. "You impress me by noticing what I need before I ask." "I've had a lot of practice not being listened to," he said quietly. She turned. "So you listen to other people to make up for it?" "No. I listen to you because I want to." They didn't kiss that night, but something shifted, and neither of them tried to stop it. It happened on a Wednesday. The mural was done. The final brushstroke had dried, the scaffolding was being taken down, and Elise stood in the center of the lobby with flecks of paint still on her arms. Staring at the wall she'd poured herself into like it had taken something out of her and given something back in return. Dominic stood a few feet away, silent. Not watching the mural, watching her. "Everyone keeps asking who the artist is," he said quietly. She didn't turn around. "Are you going to tell them?" "I will if you want me to." "Do you?" He stepped forward. "I want the world to know your name. But I won't put it on a plaque if it means you feel owned by it." She finally turned. "I've spent most of my life doing work I couldn't sign my name to. But this one's mine." "You sure?" "Yeah," she said, and her voice didn't shake. "I want my name on it." He nodded once, and there was something in his expression that made her heart thump harder than it should. Not pride, not admiration, something deeper, something that looked like belief. The plaque was installed the next morning. Elise Moreno, 2024. Commissioned by Ferris Holdings. That afternoon, he found her in her studio, crouched over a blank canvas with a pencil in hand and a look on her face like the world had stopped moving around her. "Elise," he said gently, "you okay?" She looked up. "I can't start the next one." "Why not?" "Because it feels like I just left something behind and I don't know who I am without it." He didn't offer advice, didn't pretend to understand. He just walked to the windows and opened them, letting in the breeze. The scent of rain from earlier still lingered in the air. "You need to get out of the city," he said. "Just for a few days." She raised an eyebrow. "You planning on whisking me to Paris now?" "No," he said. "I'm planning on taking you somewhere that won't ask anything of you. I don't need a vacation. It's not a vacation. It's a reset." She stared at him for a long second. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" "No." 2 days later, they landed on a private airstrip in Vermont. There was no staff, no waiting car, no itinerary. Just a cabin tucked into a hillside and a refrigerator stocked with the kind of food Elise had only seen on cooking shows. The first night, they sat on the porch with blankets wrapped around their shoulders, watching the wind move through the trees and listening to the silence stretch between them without needing to fill it. "You always this quiet when you're away from your boardroom?" she asked eventually. "No," he said. "Only with you." She leaned her head against the back of the chair. "Why?" "Because when I talk too much, I stop listening. And you're the only person I don't want to miss." The words settled between them like heat. She didn't respond, but her hand found his under the blanket. The second night it rained. They cooked together, if you could call it that. Dominic burned the garlic, Elise dropped the pasta, and they ended up eating grilled cheese on the floor with their backs against the kitchen cabinets. You ever think about what you'd be doing if none of this had happened? She asked, tilting her head toward him. You mean if you hadn't showed up at my door with sesame noodles and a death wish? She grinned. Something like that. I'd still be in that penthouse, still pretending the silence didn't bother me. And now I know better. She studied him. What about you? You ever think about who you were before the money? He looked away. Sometimes, but it's hard to remember. Why? Because I spent so long climbing that I forgot what it felt like to stand still. She reached for his hand again, then stopped climbing. He didn't respond, but later when they went to bed, he kissed her like he meant it, like he'd been meaning to for weeks. It was slow, unhurried, like they had all the time in the world. When they returned to the city, things changed, not in the way people expected. There was no announcement, no press release, no photos of them on red carpets. But his staff started noticing how often Elise's name appeared on his calendar, how his meetings ended 10 minutes early, how he smiled more. One night, as they walked through Central Park under strings of hanging lanterns from a nearby cultural festival, Elise stopped suddenly in front of a small pop-up gallery. "What is this?" she asked. He didn't answer. She walked inside and froze. Her work, canvases she hadn't shown anyone, pieces she'd stored in the back of her studio, unfinished, forgotten. Framed, lit, displayed like they belonged in a museum. "What did you do?" she whispered. "I bought the space," he said behind her. "I hired a curator, and I asked your brother to help me find the pieces you wouldn't show me." She turned to him, eyes wide. "You did this without telling me? I didn't want you to feel like you had to say yes. What if I hadn't wanted this? Then I would have taken it all down before the doors opened." She looked around. The room was full of people. Strangers. Some taking photos. Some just staring. One woman was crying in front of a canvas Elise had painted during the worst week of her life. "You think I'm ready for this?" she asked softly. "I think the world's ready for you," Dominic said. And then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Her breath caught. "Are you?" "No," he interrupted, stepping closer. "Not yet. But I need to ask you something." She blinked. "I want to buy a building. Not for a hedge fund. Not for a return. For you. Permanent gallery. Studio space. A place for artists who don't have connections. Who don't have anyone fighting for them." "You want me to run it?" she asked, stunned. "I want you to build it. I'll fund it. You run it. Your name. Your rules. No strings." She was quiet for a long time. Then, "Why me?" "Because this city needs someone who sees what you see. And I need a reason to stop climbing." Her throat tightened. "That sounds dangerously close to love, Ferris." He stepped even closer. "It is." The kiss that followed wasn't slow. It wasn't cautious. It was the kind of kiss that tore things down and rebuilt them. That night, she didn't go back to her studio. And he didn't go back to his penthouse. They stayed up on the roof of the gallery, wrapped in a blanket, watching the skyline they both finally felt like they belonged to. 3 months later, the building was purchased. 6 months after that, the doors opened on the Moreno Collective. And 1 year to the day after Elise knocked on his door in the middle of a thunderstorm, Dominic Ferris stood at the front of the gallery with a ring in his pocket and a question on his lips. She said yes before he could finish asking. Their wedding was small. Not because they couldn't afford extravagance, but because they didn't need it. She wore a dress made by a friend from the collective. He wore no tie. They married under a canopy of lights in the same room where her first show had opened. And when the vows were done and the crowd quieted, Dominic took her hands and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "I ordered takeout. The universe sent me you. And I'll never stop being grateful." Elise smiled through tears. Because she knew. She hadn't just changed his world. He'd changed hers too. Neither of them were climbing anymore. They were home. Together, the gallery had been open nearly a year when Elise stood in the back office, surrounded by stacks of portfolios from emerging artists and half-finished grant applications, and realized something she hadn't expected. She missed painting. Not murals, not commissions, not curated shows, just painting for herself. The collective had grown faster than anyone anticipated. They'd taken on 7 resident artists, hosted 3 rotating exhibitions, and launched a community outreach program that brought art supplies into public schools. Elise had become a force, a quiet one, but powerful all the same. Her name now floated in conversations it had never reached before, always followed by the kind of reverence she'd once reserved for other people's success. But between the paperwork, the meetings with donors, and managing the rotating gallery calendar, she hadn't touched a brush in months. She found Dominic in the rooftop greenhouse he'd built above the collective, a surprise he'd unveiled on their first spring morning as husband and wife. He was pruning herbs, sleeves rolled to his elbows, tie long gone, shirt half-buttoned like he'd been too distracted to finish getting dressed. "You're supposed to be in Midtown," she said, arms crossed, leaning against the doorframe. "I rescheduled," he said without looking up. "They'll live." She stepped closer, gaze softening. "You forget people get nervous when Ferris Holdings skips a quarterly strategy session. They'll forget in a week. You, however, seem like you haven't slept in 3 days." "I've been reading grant proposals." He finally looked at her. "You're not an administrator, Elise. I know, but someone has to. You built this place to create, not to get buried in forms." She sat on the edge of the planter box beside him. "I haven't painted anything in months." He wiped his hands on a towel and set the shears aside. "Then let's change that." "Easier said than done." "Not really," he said. "Not when you have a husband who just bought you a studio." Her mouth fell open. "You what?" "It's not far. About 6 blocks from here. Exposed brick, wide windows, skylight. No desk. No meetings. Just space." "Dominic, I didn't do it for the collective. I did it for you." She blinked hard, trying to hold back the sudden wave of emotion she hadn't seen coming. "You think space is what I need? I think you're suffocating in the success you built. And I think you deserve to breathe again." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "How do you always know?" "Because I watch you," he said. "And when you stop looking at walls like they're blank canvases and start looking at them like they're deadlines, I know something's wrong." She laughed, the sound muffled against his shirt. "You're ridiculous." "I'm right." Later that week, he took her to the building. It used to be a tailor's shop, long abandoned, with arched windows facing east and walls that still held the faint scent of cedar. It was quiet, untouched, perfect. "I don't want this to be another gift," she said as they stood inside, her voice hesitant. "It's not," he said. "It's an invitation." She walked the length of the space slowly, fingers grazing the window frames, the wooden floor creaking under her boots. "I'll need time," she said, "to figure out what I want to say on the canvas again." "Take it," he said. "Take all the time you need." She turned to him. "What are you going to do while I disappear into this place?" He stepped closer. "Wait, and maybe finally learn how to cook something that doesn't involve room service. You say that now, but you're going to burn eggs and call me crying." "I'd call my assistant, but I'd cry to you." She laughed, looping her arms around his neck. "You're not going to stop surprising me, are you?" "Not if I can help it." They kissed like it wasn't the middle of the day, like the world didn't exist outside the windows. Outside, the snow had just started to fall. 2 months later, Elise unveiled her first private collection in the new studio. Raw, abstract, layered with color and silence. Nothing commercial. Nothing curated for impact. Just her. Dominic arrived early and stood at the back, letting the others move through the space before he approached her. "You named the collection Inheritance," he said, reading the word stenciled on the wall. "I did." "Why?" "Because I finally figured out what I've been carrying all this time," she said. "And what I want to leave behind." He looked at her for a long time, the kind of look that still took her breath away. "You want to have a child?" The question landed between them like a slow exhale. "I do," she said. "I didn't before. Not because I didn't want to be a mother, but because I didn't know if I could give a child something better than what I had. And now I have you. And I have this. And I know what love looks like when it's not afraid to stay. He laughed softly and then pulled her into him, arms wrapping around her waist. You're going to be terrifying as a mother. Terrifying? Incredible. She kissed him under the spotlight of her own name. That summer, they closed the gallery for one weekend to host an outdoor wedding for one of the resident artists. Elise wore a sundress, barefoot in the grass, a paint smear on her shoulder she hadn't noticed. Dominic spent the entire evening chasing a 3-year-old who kept stealing cupcakes. That night, as they lay in bed with the windows open and the soft hum of the city below them, Elise rolled onto her side and whispered, "I'm pregnant." He didn't say anything at first. Then he smiled, slow and disbelieving and completely undone. "Say it again." "I'm pregnant." He pulled her close, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "You just changed everything." Again. She rested her hand on his chest. "So did you." They didn't make a public announcement. Didn't need one. But the collective added a new resident artist the following spring, a newborn wrapped in a blanket covered in tiny paint palettes. Born in a birthing center with a skylight and an easel already waiting at home. They named her Marin. She had Dominic's eyes and Elise's stubborn chin. And from the moment she arrived, she turned their world into something even more vivid. Neither of them stopped working. Elise painted while Marin napped beside her in the studio. Dominic ran his empire from home, his meetings often interrupted by baby giggles through the speakerphone. Their lives expanded and softened in places they hadn't expected. And one night, as they sat on the rooftop of the collective, stars scattered above them, Marin asleep in Elise's arms, Dominic reached for her hand. "You made me someone I didn't know I could be." She smiled against his shoulder. "You gave me the space to become her." They sat in silence, watching the lights of the city flicker like fireflies, wrapped in the kind of love that didn't need to shout to be heard. It had started with a delivery in the rain. A mistake. A misstep. A moment. And now it was everything. A home. A family. A forever.